They once commanded an empire that shaped continents, dictated the flow of money, and influenced the rise and fall of kings and governments. Every corner of Europe, every port along the Mediterranean, every vault in the financial centers of the world seemed to bend to their will. Their name was whispered in corridors of power and feared in the halls of monarchs. Yet despite their dominance, their empire collapsed, not in a storm of foreign invasion, but through a combination of betrayal, miscalculation, and the unstoppable tide of history. But the story does not end there, because while their castles fell and their armies vanished, the family behind it all did not disappear. They adapted. They shifted. They went underground, reinventing the rules of influence in ways the world still cannot fully grasp. Today, they quietly control fortunes that rival nations, their reach threading through the global economy in ways most people never notice. Their legacy is not a ruined palace or a forgotten flag. It is a silent, almost invisible grip on wealth, trade, and power that continues to shape the modern world. How is it possible to lose an empire and still own a hidden portion of the planet's wealth? That is the question we will explore in this story, uncovering the strategies, the secrets, and the subtle manipulations that have allowed this family to remain at the apex of global influence. We will trace their rise, understand the fall, and reveal the modern mechanisms through which they quietly shape everything from banking to international policy. Every decision they once made had the power to topple kingdoms. Every move they make today has the ability to move markets without a single headline acknowledging it. This is not a tale of mere inheritance or luck. It is a demonstration of intelligence, foresight, and an uncanny ability to operate from the shadows. As we begin, imagine a world where empires crumble and yet some figures emerge untouchable, operating in plain sight while the world remains oblivious. Imagine billions of dollars, not just in cash but in control over industries, resources, and nations, being quietly guided by hands history has already written as fallen. This is the paradox of true power. It does not always require visibility, and sometimes the greatest empires exist without banners or armies. Over the next few minutes, you will witness how a family that history marked as defeated continues to exercise influence that most people could never imagine. You will see how power can be preserved, not through spectacle, but through strategy. You will understand why some economic shifts, corporate collapses, or financial surges happen with such precision that it seems almost engineered. That is because they often are. From secret investments to controlling the flow of credit, from behind-the-scenes alliances to subtle manipulation of markets, their methods are as sophisticated today as they were centuries ago. You will also discover the human element, how ambition, intelligence, and adaptability can outlast armies, politics, and even time itself. This story is more than history. It is a lesson in the permanence of influence, the resilience of wealth, and the invisible architecture of modern power. It challenges the very notion of what it means to lose in history, showing that sometimes what falls on the surface masks the continuity beneath. The question is not whether they survived, but how they used survival to redefine dominance on a global scale. Prepare to follow a journey that spans centuries, traverses continents, and reveals a truth few dare to acknowledge. Power is not always about what you control openly, but what you control secretly. By the end of this video, you will look at global wealth, banking, and politics differently, understanding that the most influential forces in history are often the ones you cannot see, only infer from the ripples they leave behind. The story begins centuries ago, when this family emerged from obscurity and carved a path to influence that few could imagine. They were not born into unparalleled wealth or crowned by kings. Instead, they understood the subtle architecture of power early on: trade, credit, and networks. While armies clashed and kings battled for land, they built connections that would outlast the rise and fall of entire nations. Their initial fortune came from commerce importing goods, controlling ports, and understanding the pulse of emerging markets before anyone else could see the opportunity. Unlike traditional rulers who relied on visible force, they relied on intelligence, negotiation, and foresight. Each investment was calculated not for immediate gain, but for long-term leverage. As they expanded, they bought influence within city-states, forging partnerships with influential bankers, politicians, and merchants. Their power was invisible to the untrained eye, yet unmistakable in effect. The movement of money, the stability of markets, and even political appointments often reflected their subtle hand. By the time neighboring powers noticed, it was too late. They had embedded themselves within the very structures of society that appeared untouchable, ensuring that their influence could survive wars, revolutions, and economic collapse. This period of ascension was marked by strategic marriages and alliances that went beyond simple family ties. Each union was a calculated move to consolidate wealth and integrate into networks that controlled entire industries. While kings relied on armies, this family relied on networks that spanned nations, allowing them to maneuver without drawing attention. They became the invisible force behind empires, the silent architect of commerce, shaping markets and securing positions in key sectors like banking, shipping, and trade. Their influence reached far beyond borders, touching the lives of ordinary people without them ever knowing. The secret of their rise was not flashy power or brute strength. It was understanding the principle that true dominance is maintained when it is unseen, subtle, and systemic. They created a foundation where wealth was a tool of influence, and influence was a tool of wealth, forming a cycle that grew exponentially over generations. By the height of their power, even the most powerful monarchs and political leaders recognized their sway. Decisions made in distant capitals were often guided by advice, investments, or pressures applied by this family. Yet publicly, they remained almost anonymous, a shadow of influence whose effect was undeniable, but whose presence was almost invisible. Their story challenges conventional notions of power. While others relied on the spectacle of authority, they mastered the art of quiet domination, proving that a family can outlast kings, armies, and empires if it understands the true mechanics of control. Their empire, despite its brilliance, was not immune to the relentless forces of history. The fall was neither sudden nor simple, but the result of a convergence of factors that even the sharpest minds of the era could not fully anticipate. Political upheaval swept through the regions they controlled, and alliances that had seemed unbreakable dissolved under pressure. Economic crises struck markets they had dominated for decades, exposing vulnerabilities in their sprawling network of investments. Rival powers, recognizing the subtle threat posed by their influence, began to target their holdings, strategically undermining their operations. Internal tensions also played a role. Generational shifts brought disagreements over strategy, priorities, and risk, weakening cohesion at critical moments. While their adversaries wielded armies and armies alone, the family relied on strategy, and yet strategy proved insufficient against the chaos of combined human error and historical inevitability. The empire fragmented. Territories once indirectly controlled through commerce and influence slipped into rival hands. Key positions in trade, banking, and politics that had once been under their subtle direction were overtaken by more aggressive competitors. Public perception framed it as a dramatic loss, a dynasty reduced to ruin, but the story beneath the surface was more complex. While they lost visible authority, their knowledge, networks, and strategic foresight remained intact. They retained key investments, controlled critical nodes in banking and trade, and maintained connections that no external force could sever completely. This period of apparent collapse was, paradoxically, a transition rather than an absolute defeat. While the world saw ruin, they quietly restructured, learning to operate from shadows and indirect control. The fall of their empire teaches a powerful lesson. Visibility is not always synonymous with power. Losing territory, titles, and public recognition did not erase their influence. It merely transformed it. They adapted to a world that had changed, finding opportunities in the rubble left by war, political upheaval, and economic crisis. By the time the dust settled, the family had re-emerged in a form unrecognizable to their contemporaries. Gone were the castles and armies, but the network of influence, the flow of wealth, and the silent guidance of markets persisted, stronger and more resilient than ever. Their survival was not a story of luck. It was a story of strategy, foresight, and understanding the enduring principles of power. While the world celebrated their downfall, the family quietly shifted strategies, understanding that true power rarely needs public recognition. They had lost empires, armies, and titles, but they had not lost intelligence, foresight, or networks. The focus moved from visibility to control, from overt rule to influence through systems, money, and relationships. They began consolidating key assets in sectors that remained essential across centuries: banking, shipping, and early industrial ventures. By quietly acquiring stakes in banks, trading companies, and commodities, they ensured their wealth continued to grow, even as public perception painted them as defeated. Strategic marriages and alliances were no longer just about status. They became instruments to maintain control over markets and industries. Each connection was carefully chosen to extend influence, build resilience, and protect assets from the scrutiny of rivals and governments. Their operations became invisible but omnipresent. They leveraged intermediaries, proxies, and silent partnerships to ensure their wealth worked like a hidden engine behind global finance. Decisions that could influence entire regions were guided by subtle signals, investments and loans, leaving governments and markets responding to their moves without ever seeing the hand behind them. Their genius lay in understanding human systems and economic structures at a level most rulers could not. While empires crumbled around them, they became masters of the hidden architecture of influence. In a sense, losing the empire liberated them from its constraints, allowing them to operate across borders without the limitations of public authority or national oversight. Their survival is a lesson in adaptability, showing how true power does not require spectacle, but the quiet application of intelligence, networks, and capital. Fast forward to today, and their reach is astonishing. The family's legacy is no longer defined by castles or armies, but by assets and influence that span the globe. They hold stakes in multinational corporations, control access to key financial markets, and maintain positions in institutions that shape the flow of global capital. From banks in Europe to technology companies in Asia and real estate empires in the Americas, their influence is felt across continents. Economic trends, corporate mergers, and even government policies can often trace invisible threads back to their networks. They operate in a realm where influence is not measured by public recognition, but by the ability to shape outcomes quietly. Their methods are sophisticated. Through strategic lending, ownership of key shares, and controlling the flow of credit, they can indirectly steer entire industries. Even today, decisions made in boardrooms or financial hubs may reflect their influence, whether by design or coincidence. The modern world is so interconnected that such control does not need to be overt. A single investment can ripple across multiple sectors, subtly reinforcing their position. The family exemplifies how long-term vision, intelligence, and patience can allow influence to persist across centuries. While nations rise and fall, their strategic presence ensures that they remain a constant, shaping the contours of global wealth and policy with precision and discretion. The story of this family offers lessons that extend far beyond history. First, power is not always about what is visible. Influence that operates in the background can be far more durable than authority displayed publicly. Second, wealth is a tool, not an end. Properly deployed, it enables control, protection, and resilience across generations. Third, Adaptability is essential. When circumstances change, survival requires innovation, strategy, and sometimes a willingness to go unseen. Their history shows that timing and foresight can outweigh brute force or public acclaim. Finally, networks are more powerful than titles. Strategic alliances, financial partnerships, and the ability to influence key decision-makers can perpetuate power far longer than armies or borders. These lessons apply to anyone seeking to understand wealth, influence, and strategy, revealing the hidden mechanics that drive both markets and history. What sets this family apart is not just wealth, but psychological mastery over systems and people. They understand incentives, leverage, and human behavior at an extraordinary level. Their approach to influence is methodical, using the same principles across centuries. Identify critical nodes, secure loyalty, and anticipate shifts in markets and politics. By acting invisibly, they avoid resistance while maintaining effectiveness. Their story illustrates a timeless principle. Visible victories are temporary, hidden victories endure. Their ability to observe, anticipate, and manipulate outcomes without detection ensures that they retain an advantage most cannot perceive. History often measures power in titles, armies, or territory, but they measure it in outcomes and control. Every decision, every alliance, every investment is a calculated step in a broader strategy spanning decades and even generations. This combination of foresight, strategy, and discretion explains how influence survived collapse and continues to operate today. The paradox is clear. They lost an empire, but gained a level of control few kingdoms could ever achieve. Today, much of the world economy, industries, and political influence bear traces of their quiet intervention. While their name may no longer be in textbooks as rulers, their fingerprints are everywhere, shaping the rules of trade, finance, and policy. The family's story challenges everything we think we know about power, wealth, and survival. It proves that loss is not always the end, and that adaptability, strategy, and invisibility can redefine dominance. They teach a timeless lesson. True influence is not measured by visibility, flags, or armies. It is measured by the ability to affect outcomes, quietly, consistently, and across generations. When you look at markets, corporations, or global policy today, consider this. Some forces operate behind the scenes, unseen, yet unrelenting. The family that history wrote off as defeated is in reality one of the most powerful forces shaping our world. And the most astonishing truth is that the mechanisms they perfected centuries ago continue to influence your life in ways you may never notice, quietly steering the course of nations, economies, and opportunities across the globe.